Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here with the conclusion to the round table and a bit of a warble
I
rant.
think according to the International Energy Agency, Southeast Asian coal demand will triple for at least 20 years, and they predict that Australia will be the world's largest coal exporter by 2020. So is this debate we're having about Finkel being conducted in a reality vacuum?
Look, I think it is to a degree. I mean, let's go back to basics. Australia accounts for 1.4% of global emissions. So actually, whatever we do is completely irrelevant. But, if you listen to the people at Foreign Affairs, we have to do our thing. So, okay. But, really, I think in many senses, Malcolm Turnbull understands this. We have to have a policy. I actually think the idea of there being certainty for investors is absolute rubbish. There never will be, unless we have some sort of energy dictator. But leave that aside. We have to have a policy at any point in time which involves the lowest cost of abatement. And this is really about affordability and reliability, I think, being positioned ahead of sustainability or the emissions reductions targets. The electricity sector accounts for about a third of all emissions. There's quite a lot of low-hanging fruit elsewhere, and I think we really have to focus on affordability. Tom, you will have heard about, electricity prices going up, retail electricity prices going up by 20%. I mean, how many more years of that can people tolerate, actually?
Alison?
Yeah, look, I think it's an economic, it's an energy, and it's a social transition that we have to balance, and that's a really important aspect. I think one of the areas of the recommendations from the review I was really pleased to read about was recommendation 6.6, that actually states that COAG need to engage with relevant portfolios, housing, the state, territory, and local governments to support low-income housing occupants, which are hurt the most when it comes to price increases. So there's two specific recommendations. Firstly, to accelerate the rollout of programs across low-income households for PV and batteries, and also make improvements in energy efficiency, and then to subsidise the funding of those energy-efficient appliances and batteries for low-income consumers.
Well, let's turn back to Finkel here. I mean, let's get your sense about the CET, the Clean Energy Target, that recommended in the Finkel review. Is that better than an emissions intensity scheme, and why? Samantha?
Okay, well, I think it's pragmatic policy, and obviously we've been reasonably effective with the RET, so we're incorporating a clean energy target along similar lines, similar operation to the RET, and the idea is that it's ostensibly neutral in the sense that if you are able to, I suppose, basically produce what you focus on is certificates for each megawatt of electricity are produced in proportion to how far the emissions of the generator fall below an emissions intensity threshold. So the idea is that you can adapt, you can join in, you're not precluded, it's not just renewable sources, and obviously that's going to potentially have a greater impact across the framework given the energy mix that we've got. An emission looking at emission trading scheme or an alternative framework like that, that sort of framework you're looking at changing sort of markets. Obviously, we have the carbon pricing reduction mechanism, which was reduced. It's probably not pragmatic to shift to that. That doesn't mean that it wouldn't be effective. Imposing a threshold, basically imposing a threshold and trading on that threshold is probably the most effective.
Can I just disturb this harmony for a moment? Because we've had two major elections in 2010, 2013, where the emissions trading scheme and the carbon tax proposals were overwhelmingly rejected by the Australian people. Where is the evidence that there is public support for these carbon pricing mechanisms?
Well, I'm not sure there is actually, and certainly my sources tell me that if you go and ask people, as opposed to asking them whether they want to seem worthy, what they're interested in is affordable electricity and within that reliable affordable electricity. And I mean, that shouldn't surprise anyone. And I mean, the politicians understand this. And I think that's really why the politicians are taking this up at the moment. I think they're scared witless about the political implications of rapidly rising electricity prices, and not just for households, but for businesses. I mean, under the Finkel assumptions, it's pretty clear that we'll have no smelters, we'll have no cement factories, we'll have no fertiliser factories, and other bits and pieces of manufacturing are in peril too. Now, people like Ross Garnaut says that's okay, that's part of the deal, and maybe in 50 or 60 years' time they'll come back because we've licked the renewable energy arrangements, and they might want to come back. But I think out there in electoral land, the closures of those big operations, which provide high-paid jobs, I think is poison. So there's a lot at stake here.
Yeah, Alison, to what extent is a point that Judith is making that that there is a sort of a scepticism in the public about paying higher energy prices? To what extent does that remain a serious obstacle to carbon pricing, do you think?
Well, some recent survey was done by Sustainability Victoria. Over 3,000 Victorians were asked the question about whether they want government to actually take action on climate change. 93% said yes. 84% of Victorians supported the targets on renewable energy, and 4 out of 5 said they're willing to take action. So I think the people in the community do want action. They do want a transition pathway and a plan. I don't know that they're debating whether it's a tax or whether it's a price, but they want an energy plan to secure our future.
And they don't want to pay high prices, so that's the trouble. And that's the trouble with those questions. You don't ask the trade-off of people. That's the trouble.
Samantha, just quickly to wrap things up.
Yeah, okay, but it's not just about economics for many people now. There are social, environmental factors that are hugely relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, but I mean, we're adapting to consumer behaviour. We're responding to technological innovation. We're accelerating renewables, and we're decarbonising. That is the world.
Ladies, a terrific discussion. That was Judith Sloan from the Australian, Alison Rowe, she's the CEO of the advocacy group, the Moreland Energy Foundation, and Professor Samantha Hepburn, Research Director of Deakin University Law School. Thanks so much for being on RN this morning, ladies.
Yeah. Well, they nailed it at about the point where they said that being actually good for the climate has been lost in the list of priorities against being affordable and being convenient. That's what matters. If it's not affordable and it's not convenient, then the politicians don't want to know about it. They have willfully and deliberately, in my personal opinion, omitted from the equation the fact that climate science is not bullshit. Anthropogenic global warming is a reality, and the increasing intensity and frequency of record-breaking extreme weather events means that agriculture is becoming uninsurable because it's unprofitable, therefore it's unfinanceable. So the idea that you can cause the need to decarbonise our economy to disappear in a puff of electoral politics in the suburbs is absolute sheer fantasy. Carbon content of coal is like 100%. Coal hasn't got much hydrogen in there. It's just chunky carbon. Gas has about 40% hydrogen. So if you can burn gas to get the same heat release instead of coal, you're going to cut your carbon emissions by 40% because there's less carbon in the gas to be burnt to emit as emerge as carbon dioxide. What the hydrogen in the gas will emerge as is water vapour, which itself is a bit of a greenhouse gas, but it's nothing like as big a problem as carbon dioxide. So the politicians refuse to get their head around the fact that we have to decarbonise the economy. And they keep trying to rig all the reports and rig, like they said, it's an equation which has to be solved within the limits of a constraint. And the restraint is that it's really inconvenient to do anything practical, serious, actual about decarbonising the economy. So we're just going to go with whatever's cheapest and most convenient in the short term, because that'll get the politicians through their next election. And that's all they really care about. So I'm pretty sure the plan is going to be to grow the economy and fuck the environment right up until the environment stops the economy in its tracks. On a different topic, last week in the Australian newspaper on Tuesday last week, 3 Australian federal government serving ministers, name of Tudge, Social Security crackpot who brought out the sort of robotic debt recovery program at Christmas time. Sukhar, I don't know what he's the minister for, and Hunt, who's either is health and used to be immigration, or is immigration and used to be health. But anyway, these 3 politicians decided they wanted to comment on the Victorian Supreme Court of Appeals and describe it as being, describe the judiciary thereof as being a bunch of left-wing socialists who are conducting an experimental policy with their sentencing. Now, the big problem with this is that there are laws against contempt of court. And one of the things you can't do is speak about a case that is in progress. And at the time that they were interviewed and were quoted in the Australian newspaper, which is like Rupert Murdoch's Aussie tow rag, subsidised by Fox News because it doesn't break even on its advertising. It's just a propaganda tow rag, as I said. Anyway, because they believe in their own worldview, the journalists there got these right-wing, corrupt, crony capitalist politicians to just spill their guts in the sure and certain feeling that nobody could, criticise them. They're politicians. They get to say whatever they want, especially if they're, dog whistling on anti-Muslim matters. So the Victorian Supreme Court of Appeals were deciding the sentence of somebody who pleaded guilty to thinking about or planning some kind of a terrorist attack due to extreme Muslim views, I think it was one of the Anzac Day attacks that got nipped in the bud. This might be the bloke who wanted to catch a great big buck kangaroo and fill its pouch with explosives and paint it black and white Muslim slogans on it, or ISIL slogans on it, and let that go, expecting the kangaroo, the great big male kangaroo with its pouch full of explosives, to go and attack a policeman. I think it's that bloke. Not sure. But anyway, this fella who pleaded guilty to dreaming up stupid ideas is being sentenced by the Court of Appeals. And the judgment has been reserved. The judges are still thinking about it, and the politicians go into bat. So all 3 politicians have been summoned by the Victorian Supreme Court of Appeals to turn up, this is a couple of days ago, to explain why they should not be charged for contempt of court and bringing the judicial system into disrepute. And they didn't even show up in court. They sent the federal Crown solicitor to appear for them, and their attitude is, we're politicians and we represent the electorate, and the Supreme Court is not above criticism and we're allowed to say what we like. But the contempt laws in Australia are so strict that you can go and sit in the gallery of the family court, for example, and you can go outside and you can talk about it and you can write about it, you can be interviewed about it, but you're not allowed to identify any individual who is party to the proceedings or subject to orders made within the proceedings. That's, if somebody goes in and writes a letter to the editor and has it published discussing that they have done something in the family court and this is what happened to them, they are at risk of being prosecuted for contempt of court. Likewise, if somebody is sentenced for being found guilty and they disagree that they were guilty and they decide they're going to stand outside the court with a megaphone and say that the judge has a head full of shit and they didn't do it anyway and how dare the Queen do this, they will promptly be arrested and taken back in there and charged with contempt of court. It's a prison time offence. You go to jail for it. You certainly can't go out there in the public forum in the middle of a trial before sentence has been pronounced and start calling the judges a bunch of idiots because they're not going to sentence this wannabe terrorist to a sufficiently harsh penalty. So the Turning Bull corrupt crony capitalist government thinks that it's above the doctrine of the separation of the powers. The elected parliament has publicly in a newspaper, 3 of them at once, tried to interfere with an ongoing court case and called the reputation of the court into question. They've said that it's a left-wing socialist experiment. Gotta go. Ciao.